And now we have Mr. Sheldon Thomas, who is the Chief Executive of Gangsline Foundation Trust, a non-profit organization established in 2007. He will be coming to speak to you guys. So, hey, give him your fullest attention and your cooperation. Mr. Sheldon Thomas, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dawn, for inviting me. I was very interested in the last three speakers, especially Anton, as a young man who's served time in prison and come out and changed his life. And unfortunately, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm a former gang member. I was a gang member for 10 years. During that 10 years, 9 of my friends were shot dead. And I myself was shot at least 20 times. And at the last occasion I was shot at, the guy standing next to me got his head blown off. And so that led me to believe that I wasn't invincible, and that being a gangster was something fictional in my own mind because of the way I grew up. And for those who don't know, I grew up in a world where racist police officers would spend their time brutalizing us verbally, physically, and we spent a lot of our times on the run from the National Front, the American version of the Ku Klux Klan, until one day we decided enough was enough, and we decided that we was going to burn Brixton down, and that was 1981. So we're the original Black Lives Matter. I know a lot of people like to talk about Black Lives Matter as if it's a new concept, but we're the original Black Lives Matter because we was the first to stand against tyranny in the UK in terms of police brutality. What I'm going to talk to you about is the continuation of that, the legacy of that police brutality, which led some of us into forming gangs. For those who don't know, that is what I do now for a living. I run a charity called Gangsline. I also run a limited company, which is more interested in trying to transfer the mindset of gang members into more corporation, more corporate style of approach of making money legally, because we believe that when you can run a business model such as drug deals, bringing in drugs into the country, distributing it across the country, that means you've got to model a business idea. And we believe that we can transfer those skills into legitimate business. So that's one of the ventures we'll be doing in the coming year. Obviously, what I'm going to talk about is a very tough subject. Unfortunately, I have to share this with you because I think if we're to talk about the economy or Black economics, we're going to have to start talking about how are we going to change the narrative around gang violence. Now, I'm not sitting here suggesting for 1 second that only Black kids are in street gangs. That is not what I'm saying. We know that in the UK, there are more white kids in gangs than Black kids. We know that. But unfortunately, in London and Birmingham and parts of Manchester, the dominant gangs are Black kids. So I'm really centering today around that issue. That isn't to say, again, I'm going to repeat, that is not to say that there are not white kids involved in gangs. But unfortunately, the ones that get on the news a lot, they tend to look like us or me. So I've called it the parallel world of street gangs because I'm very fortunate and privileged that I've been able to go to America, the Caribbean, and look at street gangs there in Washington, DC, in parts of the Bronx and Boston. I was able to go to Kingston, the west part of Kingston, and look at the gangs there. And there's a correlation that I find with gangs in America and in the Caribbean and here in the UK. And it's a correlation that we must start to address within ourselves, because if we're going to build ourselves economically, we're going to have to start addressing what is stopping us from becoming a strong economy. And violence is one of them. You cannot build any strong society with violence or the amount of violence that I'm going to be sharing with you. You just can't, because the violence will stop people trading, importing, and doing business with your country. And as you know, the Caribbean is heavily weighted with tourism. And as you can see, COVID has seen a end to the tourism to a degree. And what we have to start looking at is, how do we create industries in these Commonwealth countries, in the Caribbean and parts of Africa? How are we going to create industry if violence is at the center of our lives, or many of our lives? So what we're going to look now, and I'm really sorry that we're ending on a really sour subject, a subject that some people just don't want to talk about. And the reason why the gang violence have got worse is because we're not talking about it. It's because we're not addressing it. We're turning a blind eye because of our own mini success. It's fine that we all have success to a degree where we have a nice house or maybe a nice car, but I don't believe success can be real success until a majority of our community reach to that level, and a majority of our community are not on that level. So I'm going to go into the next slide, and this is just a cycle. What I'm trying to show you here is the part that makes a child join a gang. And when you look at this, it's a very basic diagram. And at the center is the vulnerable child. And at the center of that, around that, is domestic violence, absent fathers, grooming and exploitation of younger children, groomed in prisons. Our last speaker, Anton, might know about this, but in prisons, you're more likely to be groomed by radicals, radical religious groups, and far-right groups than if you was on the outside. So we have to address that. And now what we have is an emerging white middle-class young kids who are now becoming gang members for different reasons, mainly because of the music they're listening to, which is trap and drill, and mainly because they no longer view Black people in the way they did 40 years ago, or the way their parents did 40, 50 years ago. Young white kids don't see that color disparity now. They see themselves as Black. We have more white kids now who speak Black, who act Black, who think they're Black, because of the music they're listening to and their friends. And there's nothing wrong with that, maybe to a degree, but there were other elements of that part that they think is Black culture, and it's not. And that's the music they're listening to, this kind of promotion of gangsterism and this promotion of sexism and degrading women on records, and talking about shooting and stabbing each other, which has led to an increase in violence in the UK. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say we need to know why young people join gangs. And I know some people want to blame systemic racism, which does play a part. I know people want to blame bad housing, which does play a part, and bad schools. But the biggest factor is family. Because as that young person, the young man said before, Anton, he went to jail and he felt really bad because he felt that his relationship with his daughter could be broken. And that is a fact. If you look at the work that I do across the UK and in the Caribbean, every gang member I've been into contact with, and remember, I deal with more gang members than police do. So we're talking over 8,000, 9,000 individual gang members I've actually come into contact with. And I would say out of that amount of young men that I've come into contact with, I would say 89% of them had no father figures. That's a lot. And when you look at the prison system, it's played out there. So for me, there is a correlation in America. There's a correlation in the Caribbean, and there's a correlation here in the UK. Absent fathers is at that center of that correlation. And we're not addressing that. We're not looking at it. We're too afraid to talk about it. And one of the reasons why is because our brother may be not looking after his child. That's why we won't talk about it, or our cousin. And one of the things we've become is that we just turned a blind eye to what other people are doing in our family, because it's easier to do that than to address some of the fundamental factors that is contributing to why our children are being groomed by older gang members. So we need to look at this picture as well. And what I've done is just to show you, when I say that it isn't just Black kids that are engaging in gang membership, but we've got white kids. And as you can see, this is a picture that this gang allowed me to take. This gang was based in Liverpool, Croxteth. And the picture to your right is the gang that controls the drugs in that neighborhood. Now, as you can see, they're very young. The picture nearest to us on the right is 11, 10, and 9 years old. The 11-year-old, when he met me in Croxteth a few years ago, had a 9mm gun. The picture to your left is his crew selling crack cocaine in broad daylight in Liverpool. And what people need to understand is, look at them, you can tell none of these guys are over the age of 12. None of them. None of the guys that I met on that day had any fathers. Most of their fathers were either in jail or dead. So we've got a father deficiency, not just in the black community, but a father deficiency in the white community too. And we cannot ignore this. This is a contributing factor that we seem to not want to address because it makes us look bad or we feel bad about it. But at the moment, when you see what I see, young kids being groomed, used in these trap houses. And for those who don't know what a trap house is where the older gang member will go into a neighborhood and identify a middle-aged white man who may have learning difficulties or may have an alcohol problem or may have a drugs problem. They call them nitties. And what they do, they befriend these older middle-aged white guys, take over their property, pay their rent, and then recruit young white kids to make the drugs, distribute the drugs, and be their runners. So that tends to happen a lot. So this picture that I'm showing you now is of a gang member that controls a trap house in Liverpool. And you can see how young they are. So there is no exaggeration here. We've left it late, but we don't have a choice, because if we're going to be serious about Black Lives Matter, we're going to be serious about trying to push that narrative and change that narrative and raise our economics level, raise our social level, raise our political level. Because let's face it, the Democrats and the Labour Party have taken advantage of the black vote. They have taken advantage and we've allowed them. And what we have to do is now change that narrative. We have to start figuring out how are we going to stop the violence in our community, how are we going to get men to be more responsible for their children, so that we can begin to look at how are we going to build ourselves economically as a race of people. I'm going to next touch on child criminal and sexual exploitation. I know I've got limited time and I need to move a bit faster, but I feel that because this opportunity I'm getting, I really want you guys to, and ladies, to really grapple with what I'm saying and have a real think, because no economy can be built with such devastation going on. It just cannot happen. So we have to address this. We can't ignore it. Just because it hasn't happened to you, just because your son or daughter's not involved, doesn't mean it's not happening. It is. And so we have to look at how are we going to address it. And one of the things we have to do, stop turning a blind eye to men who do not look after their children. We have to change that. We have to change that. Let's have a look at what these guys, how these guys think about women. Now, if you look at the words that's on these screens, they're not very nice words. Baby mother, wifey, head chick, fraud, older, alibi, you know, where they get girls to lie for them. We have to start asking ourselves, is this what we want men to think about our young girls, our daughters, our nieces? Because that is what a lot of young men, and I know some people are going to say, you're stereotyping, you're trying to say all men think like this. No, what I am saying is, I have not met a gang member that doesn't think like this. That's what I'm saying. So whether you want to accept it or not, unfortunately, this is more than just an opinion. These are facts. And this is based on me going around the country and doing work with young men 24/7. And so it's not based on a book. It ain't based on I'm trying to put our men down. It's based on facts. and we cannot turn away from these facts. And if you look at these words of how young men think of girls today, it's sad. And one of the reasons why it's sad is because us men have not taken up our roles properly to educate our young men. So let's have a look at some of the emotional turmoil that girls go through in terms of when they date gang members. Now, I know that this also happens even if you're not dating a gang member, because depending on how that girl has grown up, if she grew up in an abusive home, if she grew up feeling neglected emotionally, if her dad run out and her stepdad ill treats her, there are many reasons why this emotional turmoil happens in a young girl's life. But I am focusing on what happens when you date a young man who you didn't realize was a gang member until you started dating him, and then you couldn't get out of that relationship. So let's have a look at that. And this is the emotional turmoil that I've learned that young women go through on a daily basis when they're dating guys who are in a gang. And as you can see, self-harm is prominent. And in the UK at the moment, we have a big rise of self-harming, just like we've got a big rise of domestic violence. We have a massive rise of young girls self-harming themselves because they can't get out of that relationship, because they didn't realize that this guy wasn't really interested in them, but just wanted to use and abuse them. So we have to educate our kids, our daughters, on the kind of guy that they should be dating, if they're to date at all. If you believe in that, you may not believe in that, whatever. But if you do, we have to do better, because at this moment, we've got several girls on our books who have all been pregnant and they're not even 15 and they've already got babies. We've got one that's got two babies and they're not even 17. So we're not talking hearsay. We're not talking let's frighten the nation or let's frighten our community. These are facts. And the reason why a lot of people don't know about it is because a lot of the workers don't really do the work that I do, which is going into these dark places where guys have got guns and guys have got weapons. And so because we don't have workers going in there, they're feeding misinformation, making people believe that it's not as bad as what it is, where actually it is. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video of how a gang member grooms children. Now, this guy that you're going to see in this video, he made this video himself. I didn't make it. So he's actually put his picture up all over the YouTube so that the world knows he's a drug dealer, and this is what he does. So the guy you're going to see in the video is in a green jacket. He's the drug dealer, but he's also a recording artist. And what he does is do what many of them do, which is they disguise who they really are through their music to make you believe that they're musicians, but actually they're just drug dealers. And so they use music to entrap young people into believing that they're going to be big time players and big time drug dealers. And yes, some of them will make money, but some of them will die. So we have to look at this video and look at the ages and remember, everyone in this video works for that guy in the green jacket, and they're not in school. They most probably won't sit their GCSEs or A levels, because they most probably get arrested before they can do their exams or getting back into school. And so these guys are more likely going to end up in jail, coming out of jail with no qualifications, no education, and then go back most probably and do the same thing again until they get arrested again. So we need to address the grooming stage, because that is what's getting our young people involved. Let's have a play of this video. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. So, I'm going to stop there. Sorry about that. I'm going to stop the video there because of time. And I want you to look at the two young kids at the bottom right-hand corner of where you see his hands pointing. Those kids are in primary school. Yet this guy, who is 24 years old, who took over the drug industry in Arsden, Church Road, from his brother when he was 13. His brother was shot dead in a barber shop in front of about 30 people who said they didn't see anything. And he took over his brother's drugs line all those years ago. And so what he does now is that he comes across like the Robin Hood. So that's why no one turns him in. No one will snitch on him, because this is a man that not just pays his workers really well by buying them tracksuits and trainers and stuff, but he pays their parents' rent. And in most cases, the mother's rent. So the mother is going to unlikely turn him in. So we're talking about a guy that's brought sophistication to the drug industry, which I'm not saying is a bad or good thing. What I am saying, he's destroying the lives of young children, especially young black kids. And we know there's a disadvantage to black kids. Don't get me wrong, when white kids drop out of school with no qualifications, they are just as much discriminated, slightly different because they don't have the color problem, but they are discriminated in their through class. And so we have to ask ourselves, when a man who's 24 years old can use two primary school kids to move his drugs, you have to then question, what sort of society have we become where parents of that child think it's okay to accept that man in a green jacket to pay her rent? This is how far we've gone. This is how far we've gone. We've gone to the point where we think it's okay because at least somebody's paying something. So at least somebody's paying my rent. And this is what we've become. We've become a community where we're almost accepting violent music, absent fathers, systemic racism plays its part, but we turn a blind eye just because they're black. And that's a disgrace. We turn our eyes, because these guys are all black, we turn our eyes and do nothing and say nothing. And that's what's wrong. And that's when I say to people, we can talk all we want about the economic plight of the black community here and in America and in the Caribbean. But the fact is, until we start addressing some of these issues, we're not going to get anywhere economically, because half of us are pulling us back down. Let's move on quickly because of time. I'm just going to touch on this video just a tiny bit. Right, the reason why I'm playing you this video is to show you how music is instigating the violence. Young people, because of the mobile phones and the way things have changed with technology, and Anton explained that, is that you've got to understand that music now is the vehicle of grooming children, because you don't have to leave from London to go to Liverpool no longer to groom a young person, because you could be rest assured that the person in Liverpool, and for those who may come from overseas, Liverpool is at least 500 miles from London. So just in case you don't know, they're using the music videos, because when I went to meet up with that Croxteth gang member, the picture of those white kids, they were listening to trap and drill. And the people they were listening to weren't white, they were listening to black guys. So these guys don't need to leave London to groom a child in Liverpool. Because of technology, they can groom a child anywhere in the world. And that's what we have to start looking at. So we have to start addressing who is raising our children. Because if parents only spend an hour a day, and remember, this is a scientific study done by 2 professors from the Business University here in London, who have done a 10-year study on how parents spend time, or the lack of parenting spending time with children. And what they've found is that kids between the ages of 13 and 25, mums only spent 1 hour a day, and dads, if they had a dad, only spent 30 minutes a day. But the same age group, aged 13 to 25, would spend 9 hours a day on their phone, on social media. That's a fact. And so we have to ask ourselves, who is raising our child? Because if trap and drill is raising your child, which in some cases it is, then you're finding a lot of these kids, middle-class white kids, Asian kids, all looking at this lifestyle in a glamorous way and thinking, I want to be the next Pablo Escobar. I want to be the next Don or the next Badman. And so we have to ask ourselves, if we want to reverse that, how are we going to do that if our children spend more time on social media than they do engaging or with parents engaging with their kids? So let me just touch on this video that's caused the death of 2 people, or sorry, several people already, but I've got a picture of 2.
What you mean that we lying on beats? It's the truth I tell. Man really get that neats, and that 2 man's been dead in this world. How many men got by gang? Truths get done by bros and myself. Swing them shanks, my life I sell that help. What you mean that we lie on beats? It's the truth I tell. Someone trying to get scolded that winner. And when gal take wood from her back, she can feel this spinner. With his teeth, she can ride that digger. Bro, try to glide them in O-shaped digger. Don't run if you see that trigger. I can hit shakes in the back of my head that rock up this nigga. Don't be fool, just run from this trigger. In the trappers, I love them baggies, but they still happy. Don't know that will be waiting. Niggas know about me, I'm the youngest. Still hot pot, question is corn. He got bored and he got bored. Don't ride that shit, what are they called? Jump out, I've tried not get caught. This young and handsome man will pull up your blocks and be the law. Got right there, 2 raps on the sword. Let me show them something. 3 packs on the abs, looking for who? My nigga done pushed the food. My mole done touched my skin, slick skirt, trying to get through. Tell our boys for talking the fence that how you gon' give them booze. Black shot in the 1-7. You don't even know who's glider, rider. Astra full of good baps, everyone praying, do it inside them. Aim to beat on me sliding, can't see down west, everyone hiding.
So I'm going to move on, and what you notice in that video, they were almost the same, and they don't come from the same parts of London or Birmingham or Liverpool, but they almost talk the same way. They almost wear the same kind of clothes. They cover their faces. And one of the things I'm learning about the gang members today compared to the gang members when we were in a gang, I didn't hide my face. I didn't ask no one to shoot anyone on my behalf. I did my own dirt. And the problem we're having is because these older guys are grooming children, we're now dealing with children that are reckless, that have got nothing to lose. We're dealing with children that are prepared to travel 200 miles just for £100. And so if you look at this, this slide here of county lines, I wrote this 17 years ago in the Times newspaper. And people are only talking about county lines in the last 3-4 years. I've been talking about county lines for 17, 18 years. And I wrote this in the newspaper so that they could see how it operates. There's 4 cities that control the whole of England: Liverpool, Manchester, London, and Birmingham. When it comes to gangs, those are the 4 cities that control England. When it comes to recruiting, most probably the London gangs are far more superior. They're certainly far more violent, maybe not as violent as the Manchester gangs. So what you've got to understand when you look at this map, this is where children who are leaving school for 2-3 weeks at a time, leaving their mother's house, traveling on trains on their own into areas 100 miles from where they live, 200 miles from where they live, in order to sell drugs for guys who just happen to be three years older than them. So if they're 15, you know, you're talking about 19 years old, they're selling drugs on their behalf. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of young people do make money from selling drugs. No one's going to dispute that. But what I am going to talk about is the fact that of many young people under the age of 21, over 100 have died because of this. So we do need to look at this. Now, am I suggesting that only black kids are dying? No. Again, I'm going to tell you this. It isn't just black kids dying. The reason why I am talking about black kids is because it disproportionately affects us more economically and every other way, mental health and in prison. So that's the reason why I'm centering it on that. I am not telling anyone that only black kids are in gangs, because that is not true. So just moving on quickly because of time. Again, let's have a look at the numbers of missing children. Again, this is no hearsay. These are facts. You can't dispute them. There's nothing to argue about. These are the facts. We have children who go missing every year for different reasons. Now, the ones in the red blocks, are children who go missing for different reasons. So that's in 2017, 2018, that was about 16,000 children under the age of 18 that went missing. Now, obviously, we know there's more, because that was the one that they were picked up, they were found, and so you could register them, put them on a database. So you can guarantee there's much more kids missing than the 16,000 mentioned there. But we're concentrating on the grey block. And as you can see in the grey block, 8,000 kids went missing in 2017-18, which was gang-related. Gang-related. Not running from home, but gang-related. That means they were groomed by older kids and transported 200-300 miles away to sell drugs on behalf of the older gang member. 8,000 kids. And remember, that's the one we know of. It's far more than that. So we've got over 8,000 kids missing, who's been missing from school for 1, 2, 3 weeks at a time. And yet, our voices is silent. Our voices is silent. We're too scared to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. We want to talk about things that please us. Oh, let's talk about economics. Let's talk about making money. Let's talk about that. Fine, that's important. But there's nothing more important or sacred than making sure our children do not die before us. That's where we need to be at. Our children are not meant to die before us. So these are the things we need to start addressing as a community. Let's have a look at some other stats. Again, I'm really sorry if this is going to offend some people, but again, I like to deal with the facts. This is from these figures have come from the Home Office, and guarantee you it will be more. So when we're looking at the prison, there's 20,000 BMA young people in prisons across the UK. 25% of that figure is young black men. Now, here's where the breakdown happens. So when we're looking at black people across the UK, we only make up 3% of the population, but we make up 12% of the prisons in prisons over 18 to 25, and we make up 21% of children in the prisons. And remember, we only make up 3% of the population. So these are figures. Now, I know systemic racism plays its part here. We know that. No one's going to dispute that. But what we have to ask ourselves, what part did we play in not helping our children not to get into that situation? Now, it may seem strange that a former gang member who was a gang leader for 10 years, who's kidnapped people, tortured people, being shot at, done dirt myself, is sitting there talking to you about we need to fix up. Well, this all started for me when when that guy got his head blown off next to me, I then left the UK and went to America. A man called Bernie Grant took me to America, and I was staying at Jesse Jackson's house. For those who don't know who Jesse Jackson is, he's a civil rights leader. And I stayed at his house. And it was through him I began to understand about the importance of getting myself re-educated, getting myself to a point of understanding what is happening to me as a black man. And it was through him that said, we may not be able to change everything in the world, but we can change ourselves. And it was then I realized, and when he took me to a crack spot, because he then took me to a place in Washington, DC, where there was a major crack spot. And he asked me some questions around my part in that. And what I realized is that he's saying there's lots of hurting people in the world, lots of hurting people, but not everyone turns to crime to justify their hurt and pain. So it made me realize that I can't use the excuse of racism, or I can't use the excuse of being my dad not being a good dad. I can't use those excuses as to why I decided I'm going to be a bad man and shoot people, or people shoot me, or whatever be the case, or beat up police officers. So again, we have to start taking ownership of what our children are doing. We can't blame absolutely everything on systemic racism. Yes, it has its part to play. Yes, bad housing has its part to play. But the biggest factor is us as parents. Again, this is going to cause controversial. We've got a gang database, which is, I would say it could be considered racist, but the facts speak for itself. In London, regardless of what we think personally, most of the gang members in London are black. They are not white, because the white kids tend to join the black gangs. So there's no dominant, the white kids are not the dominant ones, they're the ones who are the minority within those gangs. Where we do have a gang that mainly is white, they're football hooligans, they're not gang members. And these football hooligans will go from one football match to another and have a fight with each other. So we're not suggesting that doesn't happen, but they're not gang members, they're football hooligans. There's a difference. So for those who are scared of the truth, the fact is, in London and Birmingham, they are more black gang members, without no doubt. And we cannot shy away from that. That is where we need to start looking within ourselves. And how are we going to address that? Again, to me, it comes down to the home. We cannot blame absolutely everything on systemic racism. At some point, we have to look at ourselves as parents. All of us, me included, not excluded. I have 4 kids. I'm very fortunate I managed to turn my life around before my kids got to a position where they decided they don't want to be around me, because that's what would happen. You know, when you're a guy that's used to carrying weapons, your child ain't going to want to be around that. You know, I was smoking drugs all day. My kid ain't going to want to be around that. So I had to change. So I know what Jesse Jackson said is true. Let me just quickly go on, because I've only got a few minutes left. This is what a gang member looks like. Forget all the stuff. When I had a 9mm gun, forget all of that. That's just an extension of anger. This is what a real gang member looks like. And this is how I came to this this answer here, was when I was in America and I was engaging with the gang members in Washington, and then I dealt with the gang members in Boston. And then when I went to the Caribbean, into Jamaica, and I realized there were certain mental health issues that needs to be addressed within our community that is not being addressed for one reason or the other. Sometimes it's because we believe it's racist, that they're trying to lock us up. And there's some truth to that to an extent. But there's other reasons why we don't deal with mental health properly within our communities. And what I found when I came back into the UK, I found the same situation. So there is a correlation between when you join a gang or you get groomed into a gang, that you begin to display mental health issues. And these have to be addressed, because mental health, for those who don't know, is worse than suffering a bullet wound. Believe me, if that bullet had hit me in my arm or whatever, I can recover from that. But when you have psychological problems, mental health problems, that is the hardest thing. And it's taken me 22 years to recover from my mental problems of trauma, rejection, anger, and all those insecurities. 22 years, it didn't happen overnight. and that was with help. So people need to understand mental health is a serious issue amongst gangs. We will not be able to get away with it. We can't change that. And the only way we can begin to unravel and unpack that is if we start addressing it and stop being scared of addressing the truth. The murder rate. Again, I'm really sorry to keep going on about the way things are so bad, because it's not a good way to end a fantastic conference. But I don't think I've got much choice, because I've got to wake everybody up now. I know people in America are woken up. Some people in Caribbean need to be woken up, but definitely here in the UK, we need to wake up. And if you look at the murder rate here, and this was just London. So the population of London is 13% black, 60% white. But let's have a look at the murder victims. Look at how that changes. The murder victim is 44% black and 35% white. How is that possible? How is 13% of the population able to murder 44% of a population that is far less than the population of the white people? Because the white people make up 60%. Yet the suspects in those cases, have a look at that. 48% of the suspects were black and only 24% was white. Those are startling figures. Those are not made up. They're not made up by somebody who's decided he wants to make things up. This is the reality. And if I went to Birmingham, I'll find the same thing. If I went to parts of Manchester, I'll find the same thing. Nottingham. We are in a crisis. People look to America and think, oh, they're in a crisis. We're in one. We're in one. And if we're going to build ourselves economic-wise, if we're going to start strengthening our economic power and our political power, we have to put violence and the absence of fathers, we have to solve that. Let's have a look at the mental health. Let's have a look at the mental health for 2017, which is in the light blue, and 2018/19 is in the dark blue. If you look at blacks, young black men and women, look at the dynamics. Look how far we're ahead of everyone else. 306 people was detained in a mental institution in comparison to everyone else. And you have to ask yourself, we know systemic racism plays a part in that. Yes, we do know that, but we also played a part in it because we ignored mental health in our community for so long that things got so bad to the point where this has happened, where we're now overrepresentative in the mental health institutes. So we need to look at that very carefully. How are we going to change that narrative? Simple. Stop being scared of addressing a mental health and face it, because we're losing more and more men. In fact, it's more black men than black women that are in the mental health institutes than anyone else. And here, the reason why I took the picture of the white British is to show you, in the same time period, only 69 to 70 of them was committed in comparison to our 306. Now we know, again, systemic racism plays a part in that, but we must begin to address these issues within ourselves if we're to overcome these obstacles and break the glass ceiling of the economy. Unemployment amongst black men. Again, this contributes to why young men join gangs. 4% of the white population in 2018 were unemployed, compared to 9% of the black community. Again, take into consideration, we only make up 3% of the entire population, yet we make up most of the people unemployed. So we need to address that. Again, there are two factors we have to look at: systemic racism, but worthlessness, because there's a lack of motivation amongst young men, especially black men, because of what they feel is happening in society. So we need to empower and motivate our black men to do more and rise up. We've all grown up in systemic racism. I grew up far more worse than most of you. You know, my daily life was being attacked by police officers, kidnapped, beaten in the back of a bully van, called all kinds of names. A lot of young black people have not ever faced that, ever. And I managed to turn my life around. So we can do this, but we have to all focus on it. This is now unemployment about black people with qualifications. So I'm just trying to show you, on a whole, if we was to put the population size on equal terms with white and blacks, more black kids go to university than white kids. That's a fact. But here's where systemic racism plays a part. More white kids get jobs with their qualifications than black kids. And as you can see, only 2% of the white kids who left with a degree are unemployed, compared to 6% of black kids who left with a degree. And again, with the HNC, 8%. So again, you can see that even with qualifications, there's a problem with young black men and women getting good jobs. So it isn't just about this kid left school with no qualification. It's actually about addressing systemic racism. But we ourselves need to pressure the MPs to do more in changing the way the school system works and the way our kids are not getting jobs when they leave university. I'm going to quickly touch on this board. This is Croydon. So in 2016, 17, there was more gang violence in Croydon than I think anywhere else at one point. So there was more shootings, more stabbings. And what they found was, the Croydon Safeguarding Board found, was that every child that was either arrested or was pending court case, none of them had fathers. Every child in Croydon that was arrested due to gang violence during that period had no fathers. So there is a thing we have to start looking at here. And we're going to look at what Dr. Edward Crook, he's a psychologist from Jamaica, and no, from America, sorry, but he was talking about what happened in Jamaica. And he was looking at some of the social problems. But what he's realized, there is a correlation with fatherlessness than any other factor. He's calculated from his own experience and his expertise knowledge that even though they have problems with class and poverty, absent fathers actually impacted children more than any of those issues. Again, when you look at the UN report below in 2007, the UNICEF report said children in the US, Canada, and the UK, children are more likely to grow up a lot less in a loveless household. So in other words, what they were saying is their emotions are not going to be well developed when you go into those households in the UK or in America. So what they're saying is parents are not giving their children a balanced emotional input into their life. So these kids then look elsewhere for what they think may be love. And so that's how they go looking for what you would call a surrogate father. Gang members call them my family. So we have to take into account, we have a UNICEF report that is actually saying that our children are growing up in homes where they don't feel love, so they go looking for it elsewhere, and that's what brings them into the arms of gang members. And we have a well-known psychologist from America looking at the issues of in the Caribbean and in America, and realized that actually absent fathers was a bigger problem than actually just class and poverty. Some people are going to dispute that. Now, here's a comparison that I did with absent fathers here and in America. If you look at the statistics I have, in 2011, 36% of Black African children and 48% of Black Caribbean children grew up with just a mum. That's a disgrace. I don't care how you look at it. I don't care whether you want to agree with these figures. That's a disgrace. And that's what we have to look at. But it's even worse in America. In America, 50% of African Americans under the age of 17 live with their mothers only. 50%. We have got to start taking these figures serious. It doesn't matter whether it was a white person who did these figures or with the UN did these figures. We've got to start taking this serious. How on earth are we going to build a strong economy? If you look at the Jewish people, when they left Germany, when they were forced to leave Germany because they were being killed, they realized in order to build a strong economy, they couldn't have what we're having now, which is everyone, the violence and drugs. Some of them went into it. We know that. We know some of them went into the drug industry and was part of the bootlegging era. But a vast majority of the Jews realized in order for them to get wealth, there's certain things they had to do. And one of them is that if you look in England, the crime rate amongst Jewish people is almost non-existent. That's why their economy is strong. That's why they've got money. You cannot build an economy if half of your people are in jail or in mental institutions and are killing each other and unemployed. So when you compound all of that together, how are we going to address those issues? And if you look at, sorry, I've just jumped a slide. Sorry about that. I know I'm running out of time. I can see I'm running out of time. I'm just going to show you quickly about the cost. This is the cost of gang violence in 2018 in London alone. Just London, that was 3 billion. When you look at it across the UK, it's 20 to 40 billion each year. That means, think of what that money could do to help build communities. Think of if we didn't have to spend that money on putting somebody in jail, in a secure unit, in a foster placement, in a children's home. Think about if we didn't have to do that and we could use that money somewhere else. So we need to start looking at how are we going to reduce that money so that we can actually get some of that money to build ourselves rather than lock our children up. We have to look at that. Now, this is what I wanted to do, and I'm hopefully I'll have time to do it. I wanted to show you something. So let's have a look at the figures, 20 to 40 billion. Now look at the government departments. They are spending more money on locking our children up than they have done in the same year for the Ministry of Defense. So that means we spend more money locking children up and adults up than they do spending on the military. That's how you've got to think of this. That's crazy. That's not right. So these are the things we have to start addressing. How are we going to change that narrative? How are we going to start re-educating our men to take more responsibility about their children? How are we as a community going to stop pretending that it's all racism and we haven't got no part to play in it? When are we going to do that? When are we going to start asking ourselves these questions about our daughters who are dating gang members? Why? Because they look at the clothes they're wearing, see they're wearing name brand clothes, driving a flash car, but they don't stop to think, well, this guy doesn't work a day, but yet he's driving a very expensive car, wearing expensive clothes. We've got to start teaching our girls who to look for and what to look for. We've got to start teaching our guys how to treat women, because that's where the problem is. We've got to take note that across the world, there's been 1,000% increase in domestic violence. How do you ignore that? And how do we continue to pretend that didn't happen? And this is just highlighting the fragment relationships between men and women. Because actually men have a problem. A lot of men have a problem with dealing with their emotions because of what happened in their childhood. And we all agree that psychologists across the world have all said that you can trace every violent action that a young man does in his adult life to when they were a child. And the reason why is because we're not taught to deal with emotions. We're not taught that way. So many of us don't know how to deal with emotions, so we act it out in violence. And so these are the things we need to, and I'm not saying every man, by the way, I'm saying quite a lot of the men. 1,000% increase will tell you that a lot of men are violent towards their spouses. That's a fact. And this is being played out with children who abuse other girls, sexually exploit girls, who criminalize other children, groom children. It's all played out because you can trace it back to their childhood. So I'm coming to the end, and I know some of you going, what is the solution? The solution is societal change. It's as simple as that. What you guys are doing here with the black economics, that's one, and that's important, real important. But the other real change is us. We have to stop pretending. The churches need to wake up. The churches need to become a force. People need to wake up. We need to stop blaming everyone else for why we're in this mess and start saying, you know what am I going to do to get out of it? And I'm going to leave you with a quote from a Guatemalan gang member. And this is what she said to us. The gangs filled a void in society, and the society was the absence of family life. The gang became the family. When you go to Washington, Boston, New York, and you listen to gang members, they always say, we're a family. When you go to Jamaica, they say the same thing. Barbados, Antigua, Trinidad. When you go to the UK, they all say the same thing, but they're not family. Because this is the deceit of gangs. They want you to believe that. Why? Because children are vulnerable. And children, because they're not feeling loved at home, they go searching elsewhere for it. They go searching elsewhere. So being poor doesn't mean you're going to be a criminal. But the absence of fathers, compound that with a lack of love, and compound that with deprivation and poverty and classism and racial profiling and systemic racism, there you have it. But if you had the love in the home and you didn't have a father that rejected you, then perhaps it might give you the strength to fight off systemic racism, to address systemic racism. So I'm just going to, one of the things I'd like to say is this. My company, the limited part of my company, we're looking to work with 12 gang members and transfer their skills into a more corporate approach. That's the plan. Because we're not just here trying to tell you how bad things are, we're trying to tell you what we do. Very fortunate that I'm very privileged to be able to travel and go into places that many of you can't go. I'm able to see things that many of you will never see. I've experienced things that many of you have never experienced, and I understand that. But that doesn't mean it's not happening, and that doesn't mean I don't need help. That doesn't mean that we all can't do our part. Not necessarily to help me, you don't have to, but it's to do your part. When every time we see a young person, talk to them. Don't just let them go by, because you don't know, you could be that positive voice in their hair. So we need people to become mentors as well. And that's not easy, because you are dealing with young men who feel let down by their parents, who feel let down by society for one reason or another. So my thing is this, is that I know what I presented here is a doom and gloom, but I know that if we're to talk sense and be honest with ourselves, we will know you cannot build anything when you're on rocky grounds. We've got to make our foundation strong. And the way to do it is to reduce the violence, reduce the way men treat women in our community, reduce the selling of drugs. I'm not going to try and advocate to say we're going to stop selling, they're going to stop selling drugs. That's not possible. It's gone too far. What we can do is try to manage this situation to a point where we can grow economically. So I'm going to end with that. I'm hoping that you got something from today. Hopefully I didn't offend anyone. The reality is the reality.